There are moments in life when silence becomes unbearable, when the weight of unspoken thoughts and unrealized dreams seems to press against the walls of our mind. In those moments, the question arises, why do we continue to repeat the same patterns, carrying the same emotions, and expecting a different reality to emerge? This is where the journey begins, not with an external change, but with the awakening of an inner realization that everything we manifest in life is a direct extension of the consciousness we inhabit. The essence of this introduction is not merely to capture your attention, but to invite you into a deeper reflection, one that resonates with the voice of your own spirit, echoing the teachings of thinkers like Joe Dispenza, who remind us that the brain and the heart are not separate instruments but partners in shaping the music of our existence. To understand the power of manifestation, one must first confront the uncomfortable truth that the future is never born from wishful thinking or shallow affirmations. It is born from the frequency of thoughts we sustain, the emotions we rehearse daily, and the identity we unconsciously reaffirm every morning when we open our eyes. Neuroscience reveals that the brain does not distinguish vividly between what is real and what is imagined. It encodes both with equal intensity. This truth dismantles the idea that imagination is a childish escape. It becomes instead a sacred practice, a rehearsal of the reality we are about to live. And yet, most people use this same ability to rehearse suffering, to revisit failures, and to relive wounds that no longer need to define them. The invitation here is radical, to recognize that by continuing to live in the shadow of our past experiences, we unconsciously donate our creative energy to memories that keep us enslaved. Each thought charged with resentment, each projection of fear, and each narrative of limitation solidifies neural pathways that eventually shape a personality anchored in the past. To break free from this cycle is not simply a matter of adopting new habits, but of entering into a new state of being. It is about cultivating coherence between the mind and the heart, aligning the electrical impulses of thought with the magnetic resonance of emotion, and giving birth to a field of possibilities where the unknown becomes a fertile ground rather than a threat. Joe Dispenza's work illustrates this beautifully, showing that when thought and emotion converge, when clarity of intention meets the elevated energy of gratitude or love, the body becomes a living broadcast of a new reality. This is not mysticism, but the mechanics of consciousness expressed in biological terms. The heart generates a magnetic field far stronger than the brain, influencing not only our internal state, but also the invisible exchanges we have with the world around us. By understanding this, manifestation stops being a vague aspiration and becomes a disciplined art, the art of remembering the future before it arrives, of embodying the state of abundance, healing, or connection, even when external conditions have not yet confirmed it. And yet this journey requires humility. It demands that we let go of the illusion that we control outcomes through force, logic, or sheer repetition of affirmations. True transformation is not about manipulating life, but about surrendering to a deeper intelligence that orchestrates the unfolding of reality with precision. The introduction of this path, therefore, is not merely an intellectual exercise. It is an act of courage, a decision to suspend disbelief and to allow the possibility that what we desire already exists in potential, waiting for us to tune ourselves to its frequency. As you enter this space, know that this is not about escaping your humanity, but about embracing it fully. The sadness, the longing, the uncertainty, they are not obstacles but invitations to step into a new dialogue with yourself. This video will not offer empty promises, but it will ask you to dare to feel the life you have not yet lived, to dare to release the stories that no longer serve you, and to dare to embody the truth that the future is not something you wait for. It is something you create here and now from within. There is a quiet heaviness that settles into life when a person begins to notice that the same days are repeating themselves, even though the calendar insists that time is moving forward. Stagnation does not appear suddenly. It grows silently, like roots spreading beneath the surface, until one morning you awaken with the unsettling realization that the spark of possibility has dimmed. This experience is not rare. Many people carry within them an unspoken frustration, the sense that despite effort, prayers, and countless affirmations, the external world refuses to respond. The truth, however, is not that the universe has turned its back, but that the individual has become entangled in patterns of thought and feeling that continuously recreate the past. When we talk about the blocks that prevent manifestation, we are not speaking of external enemies, but of invisible agreements made unconsciously with limitation. The nervous system, designed to protect and stabilize, memorizes emotional pain with such precision that it begins to guard against change itself. Each attempt to step into something new is filtered through the memory of old wounds, and instead of moving forward, the mind contracts into defense. From this perspective, stagnation is not laziness nor lack of willpower. It is the body keeping score of the past, ensuring that survival remains more important than expansion. And yet, survival without growth becomes another form of slow decay. In this state, people often cling to familiar discomforts rather than risk the unknown. They repeat relationships that echo earlier disappointments, return to jobs that drain their spirit, and nurture internal dialogues that reinforce scarcity and inadequacy. This cycle is rarely questioned, because the mind interprets the familiar as safe. But safety, when it is tied to suffering, is a dangerous illusion. Breaking this cycle requires not only awareness, but also a deliberate reorientation of energy, one that shifts focus away from what has been lost or feared and toward what has yet to be imagined. There is an often overlooked truth. The unconscious mind does not differentiate between imagination and lived reality. When a person repeatedly visualizes failure, rejection, or disappointment, the brain fires as though these experiences are happening again. Over time, those neural connections deepen, forming highways of expectation that anticipate more of the same. This is why many find themselves asking, "Why does this always happen to me?" The answer is not punishment or destiny. It is neuroplasticity at work, sculpting identity out of remembered pain. To reverse this, one must learn to inhabit an entirely different inner landscape, rehearsing new emotions until they feel as real as the old ones. This is where the concept of coherence becomes vital. To desire abundance while secretly expecting disappointment is to live in contradiction. The thoughts broadcast one signal, but the emotions transmit another, and the incoherence between them fractures the field of manifestation. Joe Dispenza teaches that when intention and emotion align, the body becomes a living transmission tower, signaling to the quantum field a new possibility of existence. The problem is that most individuals have learned to think one way while feeling another. They affirm prosperity, yet carry the vibration of fear. They speak of love, yet embody the frequency of abandonment. This incoherence is not a moral failing. It is the residue of unhealed experiences that continue to whisper their narratives beneath conscious awareness. Imagine for a moment a river flowing freely, its waters reflecting light with effortless grace. Now imagine placing stones in that river day after day, small resentments, unspoken regrets, quiet fears. Eventually the current is obstructed and the river slows to a stagnant pool. This is the metaphor of blocked energy. The stones are not insurmountable, but they must be recognized and removed with care. Each one represents a memory, a belief, or a repeated story that has lodged itself into the flow of life. The work of manifestation is not about forcing the river to move, but about clearing what prevents it from doing what it naturally knows how to do. Breaking free requires a moment of radical honesty. It is easier to blame external conditions, the economy, relationships, circumstances, than to recognize that the inner environment has been neglected. Yet, it is precisely here that the greatest power resides. The mind that rehearses gratitude instead of resentment, the heart that chooses to elevate its state despite the evidence of the senses, becomes an architect of transformation. It is not about pretending difficulties do not exist. It is about refusing to let them dominate the emotional climate of the inner world. This process often begins with small rituals, awakening in the morning and pausing before engaging with the noise of the world, breathing consciously until the body remembers calm, rehearsing in imagination not the replay of yesterday's fears, but the feeling of a future already lived. Over time, these practices carve new pathways, and the nervous system begins to expect beauty rather than disappointment. Slowly, the body learns that safety can coexist with expansion. Yet even as new patterns take root, there is resistance. The old identity clings to survival as though it were the only truth. Fear will whisper, "You cannot change. This is who you are." But that voice is nothing more than a memory speaking, a rehearsal of past limitations masquerading as present reality. To move beyond it is to claim authorship of one's story, to declare that the self is not a prisoner of history, but a participant in creation. It is important to acknowledge that this path is not about escaping pain or denying human vulnerability. Rather, it is about embracing the full spectrum of experience without being defined by its shadows. The stagnation so many feel is not a sign of failure, but an invitation. It calls for the courage to release the comfort of repetition and to step into the trembling openness of the unknown. For in that space, where the old stories no longer dictate the script, the true power of manifestation begins. When thought, emotion, and spirit converge, when coherence replaces contradiction, a person becomes more than a survivor of the past. They become a visionary of the future. The energy once bound to old wounds is liberated, flowing again like the river that clears itself. And from that flow, new opportunities arise, not as miracles granted by chance, but as the natural consequence of living in harmony with the deeper laws of existence. This first step may seem subtle, almost invisible, yet it is the foundation upon which everything else is built. To recognize stagnation not as punishment, but as a signal, to see limitation not as destiny, but as memory, is to begin the journey of true transformation. And it is in this recognition that the possibility of a new life emerges, not tomorrow, but in the presence of this very breath, in the awareness that you are more than your past and that the future is already waiting within you. At the heart of every human life lies a silent framework that shapes perception, decision, and destiny: belief. Unlike fleeting thoughts or surface emotions, beliefs form the architecture of consciousness, creating the invisible boundaries within which existence unfolds. Most people move through life unaware of this architecture, assuming that reality is fixed and unyielding, when in truth, it is their own convictions that carve the walls and pathways of their experience. To confront this reality is unsettling, for it means that the limits we perceive are not the universe's decree, but the echo of inner structures we rarely pause to examine. Belief is not simply an idea one holds, it is an embodied frequency. A person may say with conviction that they want abundance, yet if deep within they carry the unspoken certainty that prosperity belongs to others and not to them, that hidden conviction becomes the dominant signal. The universe responds not to words, but to resonance, not to affirmations spoken without alignment, but to the frequency consistently rehearsed by the body and heart. This explains why so many struggle with the sense that their desires are ignored, when in reality the broadcast they emit contradicts the intention they declare. The origin of these beliefs often lies in the early stories of life. A childhood marked by scarcity teaches the nervous system to normalize lack. A betrayal in love convinces the heart that intimacy is dangerous. A series of failures conditions the mind to expect disappointment before even attempting something new. These experiences crystallize into subconscious programs that dictate responses long after the original events have passed. It is as though the soul carries invisible inscriptions, carved not in stone but in emotion, guiding choices with an unseen hand. Unless illuminated, these inscriptions continue to build the walls of the same recurring experiences, keeping the individual bound to familiar cycles. One of the least understood aspects of manifestation is that the subconscious mind governs far more than conscious effort. Neuroscience estimates that the subconscious operates at a speed and depth that conscious thought cannot match, orchestrating actions, emotions, and even physiological responses. This means that affirmations or surface-level intentions cannot overwrite deep-seated beliefs unless those beliefs are brought into awareness and restructured. Without this, the conscious mind may say, "I am worthy," while the subconscious continues to carry the unshaken memory of rejection. The result is incoherence, a divided state where the broadcast to the universe is fractured. To see how this functions, consider the metaphor of a compass. The conscious desire is like the hand of the compass pointing north, but the subconscious belief is the magnet hidden beneath the table. No matter how much effort is placed on keeping the needle fixed toward intention, the hidden magnet will always pull it elsewhere. Until the magnet is addressed, the direction remains compromised. In the same way, manifestation is not only about setting intentions, but also about uncovering the unseen magnets of belief that quietly direct energy away from its desired destination. There is also a symbolic dimension to belief. Throughout history, spiritual traditions have spoken of faith not as blind acceptance, but as a creative force, the capacity to embody a future reality before it materializes. In modern language, belief can be seen as the pattern of expectation that informs how the brain and body prepare for what is to come. If one expects disappointment, the body tenses, the breath shortens, and perception narrows, making it more likely to interpret neutral events as threats. If one expects grace, the body relaxes, the heart opens, and perception widens, allowing opportunities to be recognized where they might otherwise have gone unnoticed. Thus, belief sculpts reality not only through mystical means, but through the very physiological state it induces. Yet belief is not immutable. The brain is plastic, capable of rewiring, the heart is resilient, capable of reopening, and the spirit is infinite, capable of reimagining its place in the cosmos. The key lies in creating experiences that contradict old beliefs with such intensity that the nervous system can no longer cling to its outdated inscriptions. This is why profound emotional states, whether of awe, gratitude, or love, are so transformative. In those moments, the body records a new truth, one that vibrates with greater coherence than the memories of pain. Over time, repeated exposure to such elevated states reshapes the architecture of belief itself. There is also a paradox to consider. Belief cannot be forced. To tell oneself, "I must believe," often reinforces the very doubt one wishes to dissolve. True belief emerges as a natural consequence of experience, both internal and external. Practices such as meditation, visualization, and heart-centered breathing are powerful, not because they trick the mind into false conviction, but because they create lived experiences of peace, connection, and abundance within the present moment. These experiences begin to accumulate, and slowly, the subconscious accepts them as reality. The magnet beneath the table weakens, and the compass begins to align with intention. In this light, the work of transformation becomes less about demanding new beliefs and more about curating new experiences of the self. Each time the body is guided into coherence, each time gratitude is genuinely felt, each time imagination is used to rehearse joy rather than pain, the architecture of belief shifts. The walls of limitation begin to crack, and through those cracks, light enters. Belief evolves not through command, but through resonance, not through force but through surrender to experiences that reflect the truth of possibility. It is important, however, to recognize the resistance that arises when old beliefs are threatened. The mind may protest with skepticism, the heart may shield itself with cynicism, and the body may recoil with anxiety. These responses are not signs of failure, but evidence that the old architecture is being challenged. Like a structure that trembles before collapse, the belief system resists because it knows transformation is near. To walk through this stage requires patience and compassion, for the self that clings to limitation is also the self that once sought protection. Ultimately, the unseen architecture of belief is both the prison and the key. It holds the individual within cycles of repetition, yet it also contains the possibility of liberation. When belief shifts, perception shifts. When perception shifts, action shifts. And when action shifts, reality reorganizes itself in alignment with the new broadcast. To recognize this is to reclaim authorship of life's script, to see that the boundaries we once thought unchangeable are nothing more than scaffolding built from memory. And like scaffolding, they can be dismantled, making way for a structure more spacious, luminous, and aligned with the soul's highest vision. The invitation is simple yet profound, to step beyond the inherited architecture of old convictions and into the living space of new possibility. For in that space, the unseen begins to take form, the intangible becomes visible, and the story of one's life transforms from repetition into creation. Expectation lives at the core of human experience, yet few realize its double-edged nature. On one hand, it serves as the compass of possibility, orienting the mind and heart toward futures not yet born. On the other, it can become the invisible chain that binds a person to disappointment, replaying old wounds under the guise of anticipation. To explore expectation is to walk a fine line between hope and attachment, between vision and illusion. And it is precisely in this paradox that the art of manifestation often unravels or takes flight. When individuals first encounter the language of manifestation, they often approach it with the fervor of hope. They are told to visualize, to affirm, to claim what they desire as if it were already theirs. But beneath this conscious effort lies an unconscious question: will it happen? That question, repeated daily, carries within it the vibration of doubt. Instead of broadcasting certainty, the energy being transmitted into the field becomes one of waiting, longing, and lack. In this way, expectation transforms from a creative force into a silent saboteur. The universe, responsive not to words, but to the frequency of the sender, mirrors back the very uncertainty that is being rehearsed. The paradox deepens when we consider that expectation is both necessary and dangerous. Without it, the imagination collapses and vision loses its direction. With too much attachment to it, the nervous system becomes hypervigilant, scanning constantly for evidence that the desired reality is arriving. This vigilance, however, activates stress responses in the body: tightened breath, shallow heartbeat, contracted muscles, that signal the opposite of trust. Instead of embodying the reality of abundance or love, the body rehearses scarcity and fear, reinforcing the very conditions one seeks to escape. To understand this paradox, it is helpful to look at the science of prediction. Neuroscience shows that the brain is essentially a prediction machine, constantly anticipating outcomes based on past experience. When expectation is rooted in unresolved pain, the brain predicts repetition, and the body prepares accordingly. This explains why individuals often attract situations that echo their history, even when they consciously long for something different. The brain's predictive model insists on safety, and safety is often equated with the familiar, even when the familiar brings suffering. And yet, expectation can also be alchemized. When it is stripped of its attachment to specific outcomes and infused instead with elevated emotion, it becomes not a demand but a field of possibility. Gratitude, love, and wonder transform expectation into receptivity, shifting the body from contraction to expansion. In this state, the nervous system no longer searches for evidence of arrival. It embodies the arrival itself. The paradox dissolves because the individual no longer waits for proof, but becomes proof. Consider the image of a seed planted in fertile soil. If the gardener checks the earth every hour, digging into the dirt to see whether the sprout has emerged, the seed's growth is disrupted. Expectation that demands constant evidence suffocates creation. True expectation, by contrast, trusts the unseen processes of time and nurtures the soil with presence, water, and sunlight. Manifestation operates on this principle. What is rehearsed internally must be allowed to unfold without constant interference, with faith in rhythms beyond immediate perception. This paradox also reveals the difference between control and surrender. Control insists that the outcome appear in a specific form, within a specific time frame, according to the dictates of personal will. Surrender, however, acknowledges the intelligence of the unseen field, trusting that the form in which abundance or healing arrives may be wiser than the limited imagination of the ego. Expectation becomes toxic when it narrows possibility. It becomes transformative when it opens to mystery. Spiritual traditions echo this truth. Ancient texts describe faith not as the certainty of outcome, but as the assurance of alignment, the knowing that the unseen responds to inner coherence. When aligned with elevated states of being, expectation functions less like a demand and more like an invitation. It says not "this must happen now," but "I am already living in harmony with what is to come." In that space, the paradox resolves into a deeper truth. Expectation is not about predicting the future, but about inhabiting the vibration of the future before it manifests. The emotional terrain of expectation must also be honored. Behind every unmet desire lies grief, the mourning of a reality that has not yet come to pass. Many suppress this grief, believing it to be a weakness or an obstacle to manifestation. Yet to deny grief is to deny authenticity. By acknowledging the sorrow of waiting, by allowing tears to cleanse the space of longing, one creates emotional honesty that paradoxically strengthens the capacity to receive. Expectation, then, becomes not a rigid insistence, but a tender dialogue with the unknown. There is a symbolic wisdom in this dance. Life itself breathes through expansion and contraction, through tides that rise and fall, through seasons that flourish and fade. Expectation mirrors this rhythm. There are moments to envision boldly, and moments to release fully, To expect without clinging, to dream without demanding, is to participate in the cosmic dance of manifestation with grace. Those who master this rhythm discover that life often exceeds their imagination, delivering not what was demanded, but what was truly needed. The paradox of expectation ultimately asks for maturity of spirit. It calls one to recognize that disappointment is not the universe's cruelty, but the misalignment of inner frequency with outer desire. It asks for humility, the willingness to admit that the self does not always know the form in which blessings will arrive. And it invites trust, the surrender to a greater intelligence that orchestrates with precision the unfolding of existence. Expectation, when misunderstood, imprisons the soul in cycles of hope and despair. But when understood as a state of embodied receptivity, it liberates. It becomes less about waiting and more about becoming, less about demanding and more about aligning. In this transformation, the paradox ceases to be a problem and becomes a portal, opening into a life where the unseen is no longer feared, but embraced as the fertile ground of creation itself. Transformation is often spoken of as a single breakthrough moment, a sudden awakening that changes everything in an instant. Yet the reality is more subtle, more rhythmic, and infinitely more human. True transformation is not an explosion, but an unfolding, not a single event, but a living practice that weaves itself into each breath, each thought, each silent choice made in the unseen spaces of the day. To understand manifestation and personal growth as living practices is to release the illusion of arrival and to embrace the truth that becoming is a continual act, one that requires presence rather than perfection. The journey of transformation begins not in grand gestures, but in the intimate spaces of attention. What a person chooses to notice, the emotions they choose to rehearse, the inner narratives they permit to repeat, these seemingly small acts become the architecture of destiny. A morning filled with hurried complaints and silent worries is not neutral. It sets the tone for how the nervous system will anticipate the rest of the day. In contrast, a morning that allows for stillness, gratitude, or even a few moments of conscious breath establishes a different rhythm, one that teaches the body to expect expansion rather than contraction. Transformation, then, is lived not in abstract ideals, but in the repetition of small, consistent alignments. One of the most profound aspects of this practice lies in the recognition that the body itself becomes the record of transformation. Every thought generates a cascade of chemicals. Every emotion leaves its imprint on the nervous system. Every choice reinforces or dissolves a pathway. To live in fear daily is to sculpt the biology of fear. To live in gratitude consistently is to rewire the brain and heart to anticipate beauty. This is not poetic metaphor, but physiological truth. The body, as Joe Dispenza often emphasizes, is the unconscious mind. It remembers, rehearses, and reflects the states that are most frequently visited. To transform one's life, then, is to offer the body new experiences so often that the old self has no choice but to dissolve. Yet this practice is not sterile or mechanical. It is deeply symbolic, infused with the language of ritual and meaning. A candle lit in silence, a walk taken with full attention to breath, a journal entry written not with complaint but with curiosity. These are not trivial acts. They are rituals that signal to the subconscious that something new is being chosen. Spiritual traditions across time have understood this. Transformation is anchored in repeated symbolic gestures that tell the psyche and the spirit, this is the new path. Over time, the accumulation of these gestures weaves a new identity, one that no longer seeks to escape the past, but to embody a future that feels alive in the present. Still, resistance is inevitable. The old self clings with remarkable persistence, whispering doubts, resurrecting fears, replaying memories that beg for attention. Many mistake this resistance for failure, believing that the recurrence of old thoughts or emotions means transformation has not begun. But the presence of resistance is not evidence of defeat, it is evidence of movement. Just as muscles ache when they are stretched beyond their familiar range, the psyche trembles when invited to step beyond its old limits. To interpret this trembling as weakness is to misunderstand its meaning. It is the sign that something is being rewritten at the deepest level of being. In this rewriting, there is also a sacred paradox. Transformation requires both discipline and surrender. Discipline creates the structure, the repeated practices, the chosen thoughts, the elevated emotions rehearsed day after day. Surrender, however, allows space for the mystery, for the unexpected ways in which the universe responds to alignment. Without discipline, the practice collapses into inconsistency. Without surrender, it hardens into control, suffocating the very life it seeks to invite. The balance of these two qualities, steadfastness and openness, creates the living practice of transformation. It is here that metaphors become powerful teachers. Consider the butterfly, whose transformation does not occur through effort, but through dissolution. Within the cocoon, the caterpillar does not force itself into wings. It dissolves into a liquid state, allowing imaginal cells to orchestrate the emergence of a new form. Transformation in human life follows a similar rhythm. The old self must be allowed to soften, to dissolve through forgiveness, release, and acceptance, so that the new self may emerge not through strain, but through surrender to deeper intelligence. To resist this dissolution is to cling to the shell of an identity that has already outlived its purpose. Equally important is the recognition that transformation is not linear. There will be moments of clarity followed by seasons of confusion, days of profound connection, followed by nights of emptiness. This rhythm is not failure, but part of the process. Just as the tide recedes before it returns with greater force, so too does growth require periods of apparent stillness, where the unseen work beneath the surface prepares the next wave of expansion. To walk this path with patience is to trust that even the silence is sacred, that even the waiting carries meaning. In practical terms, the living practice of transformation invites individuals to become artists of their inner world. Every thought is a brushstroke, every emotion a color, every choice a shaping of the canvas. Over time, the picture changes, not by accident, but by deliberate participation. This artistry does not demand perfection, for even the uneven strokes contribute to the whole. What matters is not flawless execution, but consistent creation, the willingness to return to the canvas day after day with renewed presence. At its essence, transformation is less about becoming someone new and more about remembering who one truly is. The practices, the rituals, the elevated emotions, they are not additions but unveilings, dissolving the layers of fear, doubt, and conditioning that have obscured the deeper self. When that self begins to shine through, manifestation ceases to feel like a struggle and becomes a natural consequence of alignment. Life responds not to effort but to authenticity, not to desperation, but to coherence. The living practice of transformation, therefore, is both deeply personal and universally accessible. It does not require extraordinary talent or rare opportunities. It requires only the willingness to meet each day with presence, to cultivate coherence between thought and emotion, and to surrender control to the intelligence that breathes through all things. In doing so, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, and life itself becomes a continuous revelation of what was always possible. To step into this practice is to acknowledge that transformation is not a destination, but a lifelong dance. Each breath offers a choice, each moment an invitation, each thought a seed. And when lived with intention and openness, these seeds bloom into realities that not only reshape the individual, but ripple outward, touching the fabric of existence with the quiet power of a life aligned with truth. Every journey of transformation begins in silence, in the unspoken recognition that life as it has been lived no longer satisfies the deeper call of the soul. What we have explored here is not merely a set of ideas or techniques, but an invitation to step into a new relationship with reality itself. The architecture of belief, the paradox of expectation, the subtle rituals of daily transformation, all of these are not external tools, but inner doorways, waiting for your presence to activate them. To embody manifestation is not to command the universe with arrogance, but to align with its intelligence through coherence, surrender, and authentic intention. The wisdom of Napoleon Hill reminds us that every great achievement begins with a definiteness of purpose, while Neville Goddard teaches that imagination is the seed of reality. Together they echo a single truth: the life you desire already exists in potential, vibrating silently in the unseen field, awaiting your permission to take form. The question is never whether the universe will respond, but whether you will align with its rhythm. Each act of gratitude, each moment of trust, each willingness to release the past becomes a signal that you are ready. And in that readiness, the miraculous ceases to be extraordinary. It becomes the natural flow of a life lived in harmony with spirit and mind. This path does not promise the absence of pain or the erasure of challenge. Instead, it offers the courage to meet those moments with openness, transforming them into stepping stones toward deeper clarity. To live in this way is to recognize that abundance, love, and peace are not destinations, but frequencies available now, waiting to be tuned by the energy you embody. Your future is not separate from this present moment. It is being written now, in the vibration of your heart, in the intention of your thoughts, in the coherence of your being. The journey continues with each breath, each choice, each quiet decision to live not as a prisoner of memory, but as a creator of destiny. And when you choose that alignment, life itself becomes the evidence of your transformation. What would your life look like if you finally allowed yourself to embody the future you've been rehearsing in your imagination? If this message spoke to you, I invite you to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the guidance that can deepen your journey. And don't stop here. On your screen now, you'll find another video that continues this path of awakening. Let this be the moment where you step fully into alignment, with wisdom that flows beyond words and a future already waiting to unfold.